everyone. My name is Selena Valadez, and I'm joined by
Daniella, Felix.
and we're here part of Long Story Short, which is part of the 2024-2025 EPCC UTEP Humanities Collaborative. And today we'll be talking about Animal Farm. So, Daniela, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we talk about Animal Farm, there's this certain fear that it's such a heavy, convoluted book. I mean, don't get me wrong, it is. But I think nonetheless, it's a really important book to read, so we shouldn't really be scared of it. So, and I also think that it's important because of the entire historical context as well. It deals with a little bit of the themes of the Russian Revolution, and it can also talk about revolutions regardless of time. So, yeah, that's why I think it's a really important read. But I don't know. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? Like, I think there's definitely a lot of symbolism packed into it, and I think no matter what your reading level is, there's something that you can take from it, whether you're young or older. And actually, let me get started with the first question. I wanted to ask, what did you think about the role that language and propaganda play in the novel?
Actually, it's really interesting because in Animal Farm, there's many characters that act as agents to other people, right? Squalor acts as an agent for Napoleon, and that's the way how language is and propaganda is depicted. Scholar gives out these massive speeches of how Napoleon, even though he's a tyrant, he's really, really great, and other animals in the farm believe it to be true. Even boxers like Napoleon is great, and I will work hard because only a scholar tells him to. So it must be true, right? So that's a power of how propaganda plays in the book, and also it's really important to note that this book actually in the West, like during the Second World War, um, it was actually seen as propaganda, but like to scare people here in the West into the horrors of what was happening on the other side of the globe. Right? The the war, and even the CIA made a film about it in order to like scare people and also inform them in a way of what was happening at the time. So that's a way how I can see it, propaganda happening both in the book and in real life.
Yes, and I think it's good that you touched on the way that it was used. Ironically, was used also as propaganda after World War II, because there was a lot of there was the Red Scare, right?
Oh, yeah.
Communism, and people were afraid of communism, so the U.S. did use this as a way to kind of scare people about or warn them about the problems that with communism. And it's interesting because this is a book that has propaganda in it, but then it was also used as propaganda.
The duality, I mean.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's a little ironic and interesting. Yeah, and so I really like that point. And do you want to say anything else?
Yeah, now that we're talking about propaganda, we should also talk a little bit of what is propaganda, right? Propaganda is basically the exposure of ideas, even like media, photos, pamphlets, flyers, in order to push a certain political agenda, right? But if we talk about propaganda, we should also talk about the power of words and rhetoric, right? We were saying that a little bit earlier, how language literally has the effects to change reality in a way, like the laws that we follow. They're written in a book or in a piece of paper, and then we follow it. So it has literally the power to shape and dictate reality. And that's why I want to bring up in the book, like the power of language begins positive at first, right? The entire animals are singing the song. It was called Beasts of England.
Yes.
Yeah, this song that it goes to the beat of La Cucaracha. Which
Yeah.
it was really.
Saw that.
Yeah, so that was like a really positive thing, right? Because it brought forth unity and community in a time that was really difficult and oppressive. But then, as the story continues, these words, these languages, they get distorted, right? With the Seven Commandments and the entire of animalism, um, we get this idea from Old Major that there will be an utopia. We get this idea in words, spoken, but still words, and so the entire farm has hope. But then they write the code to animalism, which is that all animals are equal. and they also write about the Seven Commandments. So we get this idea of like, oh, things are looking up, things are going to progress. But then Napoleon distorts these words, these languages, and suddenly reality shifted for all of these animals, and the only people, the only I don't know why I keep calling them people. They feel so real. Anyway, so the entire big community, I will say, the entire pigs are the only ones that are getting privileges and benefits from these languages because they are the ones that have control of it. So I think that's really important to bring out, like how words have so much power, and whoever controls it, who controls the narrative and reality of our lives. So yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. And I think also for anybody who, for whatever reason, maybe they're watching, they don't know, they've never read Animal Farm. It's important for us to back up a little bit. And so the pigs, they live on a farm, right? And the farmer that they work for, Mr. Jones,
Yeah.
he is pretty much exploiting them. He takes and he takes and he takes, and they're kind of getting fed up about it. And here comes old Major, a pig, who is saying like, this isn't right, we shouldn't, we're the ones that do all the work, and we don't benefit from it at all. So that's why they decide, right, to old Major comes up with the song Beasts of England, and then that's when they decide to kind of unite and overthrow this farmer, because they're sick of putting up with all this exploitation. And that's where what Daniela was saying, right, about how they end up coming up with the animalism and like all these commandments that follows. But yeah, they're definitely they were definitely fighting a really oppressive situation in the beginning, and then things kind of like changed.
Spiral out of control.
Yeah, it kind of changed from there. So I was going to ask, why do you think, since you brought up Squealer, why do you think it's so easy for Squealer to manipulate the other animals, and how does that resemble, I don't know, maybe something in history that you learned?
Yeah, for sure. I think the role of Squealer is that he's a propagandist as well, but also the fact that pigs are seen as the more knowledgeable and wiser of animals. That's how they get away with all these things, right? And that's how they get away with taking more apples, I think. It was at the beginning.
Yeah, they end up doing a lot of, right? They end up like spoiling themselves with apples and other items too, other food items.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting because we get this idea of like, because I'm the better quote unquote animal, I get to have more things, I get to have more privilege. And I don't know, that's his entire role, I think. And also the fact that he was based on, I think it was Stalin, right? No.
No, yeah, Squealer. Was it Truck? No, that was.
Let me look at my notes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, Snowball is Trotsky.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think actually Squealer. I think when I was researching it, he's based on a few. Yeah, he's based on a few people, but definitely propaganda is one of the main roles that he plays, right? And this idea, like kind of what you were saying about how they think they're better than the other animals because they're quote unquote more intelligent, and so that gives them the right to kind of take more and consume more and not work as hard, right? Like that's the idea behind that. And I also think yeah, it's just interesting how education plays a huge role, right? Like in the way that they separate themselves. There ends up being like a hierarchy within the animals, and education does play a role. I know we talked a little bit about how they did at first try to all learn how to read, and teach the other animals to read, but then as the story progresses, it does become more divided, right? And some people have more privilege to education than others. So what do you think about that?
Actually, I wrote it down in my notes because I think that's really one of the key themes, if not the entire key theme of this entire book, education and knowledge, right? Like you said, the animals begin with wanting to learn how to read, like the 10 commandments of 7 or 10? Seven commandments. 7 commandments of animalism, right? So they do learn to read and write, some of them, but some of them do not. And the ones that are opposing, well, that want to oppose the Napoleon's dictatorship, don't have the right words to say it or to voice their own opinions, so they just stay quiet. Which again, it's like the entire thing of this book, like having the words to say what you're feeling, even if it's an opposition or not. And yeah, so with words we get, like, both animals, right, in the story, and as humans we get the ability to be agents of ourselves and to defend ourselves. And but in the animals of the book, they get to build the school, right? Napoleon builds basically the school for his kids and also the puppies that he was.
Yeah, so he has two dogs that end up having puppies, and he takes them right away, and he says, "Oh, I need to train them, and I need to bring them up on my own," which later we find out, right? It's because he wanted them to be loyal to him and to answer to him. So yeah, I mean, even in that situation, he definitely takes advantage, and he steals them from their parents,
Yeah, I mean,
so that he can do that, right? So he can have more power. And I do want to really quickly, you brought up the word dictatorship, right? So I do want to define that just in case anybody isn't sure. Dictatorship is a form of government where one person or a small group possesses absolute power without effective constitutional limitations. And we do see that, or a form of that, right, in this book, with Napoleon starting to bark orders, and there really isn't any checks or balances, right, that usually democracies tend to have. And even there was a point in the story where Napoleon and Snowball are kind of like running right against each other.
Yeah.
They're having an election,
Oh,
and
boy.
and they're trying to persuade the animals like why they should pick them, right? Why they should vote for them. And Snowball is very convincing. Snowball says,
Charismatic too.
yeah, and he says, and speaking of words, right? He's really good with his words. And he says, yeah, you should vote for me because I want us to build a windmill, and the windmill is going to supply the farm, and we won't have to use any energy. Like, we can just run off the windmill, and this is going to be great because then animals have more time to themselves. They can, this pretty much this windmill is going to help solve a lot of problems and help them work less. And so it sounds like a great idea, but you bring Squealer into the picture, and then you bring Napoleon into the picture,
And the wind.
yeah, and
I mean, the wind that destroyed the wind.
yeah, and yeah, they first they end up attacking Snowball's character, right? They say, oh, that's not gonna work. The windmill's not gonna work. That's a bad idea, right? So we have that first, and then they end up eventually running him off the farm, and then if that isn't bad enough, they end up pretty much lying, right? Speaking of propaganda, they end up spreading rumors and saying that Snowball doesn't even like them.
He was a traitor, right?
Yeah,
I
that
think
he was a traitor.
They actually called him a traitor.
And it's funny because he was, from the beginning, he was all for them. I mean, he even, when there was that revolt with the farmer, he even was out there running first. Like, he was ahead of everybody running and doing something about it. And then you have Napoleon and Squealer calling him a traitor and saying that the windmill was a bad idea and this and that. And then later on, you have them saying that they're going to build the windmill and that the whole idea was their idea to begin with. So it's kind of, again, ironic. And how they use language, going back to what you said about language, and also education, but I think language for sure plays a huge part in that scene of like the way that they manipulate this idea that people had this image of Snowball and make them turn on him.
Yeah, and if we're going to talk about how the entire farm got basically reinvented, I wanted to ask you, like, I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments about how or why, like an explanation of why Napoleon wanted to change the name of the farm, and then I believe at the end they changed it back to its original name. So do you have a comment for that? Because I think it's really interesting to think about.
It is an interesting point. I was thinking about it too, and it was kind of one of those moments where I like kind of had to reread it, and I was like, oh whoa, like what's happening
It took
here?
you forever.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it just goes to show that the thing that they were fighting for, the thing that they were fighting against, they ended up becoming, and that's how I took it.
That's a lot. That's
Right?
a quote right there.
That's like to me, that's what that meant. It's like you're fighting this thing and you're fighting it, and when you don't have a system, and when you don't have maybe like clear ideals, and again going back to those like checks and balances, and you don't have accountability, you end up becoming the very thing you're fighting against. And it was really unfortunate. I mean, they tried so hard to change the name. They said they didn't want to be anything like humans. They said, we're not gonna walk on two legs. We're not gonna eat the things that humans do. We're not gonna sleep in their beds. And then they ended up doing, yeah, and use their money. And they literally ended up doing all of that, right? Like they they fought so hard against Mr. Jones and the system that he had created, and unfortunately they created a similar system. And in some ways it was even worse. Like even in the book it says, like, in some of the animals couldn't remember if they had a better life before with Mr. Jones, or if they had a better life now that Napoleon was ruling them. So it's really interesting. What
There's
did you?
no joy.
Yeah,
There's no more songs of the Beast of England.
exactly.
It's really sad.
Well, I'm curious. What did you think about it?
Yeah, okay, my theory, it might sound a little bit far-fetched, right? Because Napoleon is an animal at the end of the day, but I kind of feel that he had this entire agenda of becoming like this super villain cartoon. Yeah, right. Because I think he wanted to fit in with the humans, right? Like he grew up witnessing how humans were technically better because they took like the efforts of the labor. And so I feel that he had this bit of how do you call it, like inferiority complex,
Okay,
right?
yeah.
Of seeing himself as less because he's an animal. And that's why I think he wanted to mimic that. Not because he necessarily wanted power, but because he felt so insecure about him being an animal, being a pig.
Right.
And that's why I think they started drinking and they started dealing with the money. And that's why they changed the name of the farm back to see, kind of like to give a message to the humans. So I know it sounds really crazy, but it kind of reminded me of that. Like this entire thing, like, hey, look at us, we're human too. Like, or we're almost as equal as you humans. That's why we're trading with you, and that's why we reverted the name of the farm back. That's my theory, at least.
No, that's really interesting. I think that's an interesting point, and especially because I can see that for sure. Like I can see how they wanted to emulate that, right? Like, and especially from an insecurity like perspective, yeah, like from a place of insecurity, I can definitely see how you know what it would be smart to attack them and then go turn around and do the same thing and try and
Like
pretty much be them. Yeah, like it's weird, but I mean it does happen, and yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, and it also goes back to because there's a lot of psychological themes here in this book, like for example, scripting. So I wanted to ask you, like, did you notice some psychological effects in the rebellion in itself, or something that you think like, oh, this is what a human would experience, but it's like a psychological thing on an animal. Like it's kind of trippy.
Mm, can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah, for example, I think that in the entire rebellion, there's this entire thing of groupthink, which, for those of you who don't know, it's basically a psychological, I want to say, syndrome? Yeah, it's a psychological thing where there's a group of people based on the name groupthink, but they think this exact same way, and whoever goes against the what is the norm, it's like seen as this black sheep of being like, oh, you're different than us, hence you don't belong to this group. So that's why I bring out like the psychology of the book, because I think it's really interesting to explore that. Besides groupthink and this lack of individuality and like fear to speak off and almost like losing their sense of self, I think.
Yes, I do think individuality, well, an attack on individuality is a huge part of this. And going back to what you said about groupthink, like there is a lot of conformity that comes with. It's interesting because at first it's like a community, and then it turns into this like dictatorship
Absolutely.
to where people are so scared to speak out, like you said, right? And I also think there's a lot of gaslighting. You know, like if you want to talk about psychology,
And propaganda. I mean.
yes, there's a lot of gaslighting, right? Especially with Squealer, and a lot of some of the animals actually internalize that. For example, we were talking about the mare. Was
Clover.
it Molly? Oh, Clover.
Clover.
Yes, Clover. So Clover starts to notice that, hey, I don't remember that commandment saying that the way that Squealer said it, right? And then she even asks Muriel, one of the goats, to read the commandments on the wall. And when Muriel goes to read them, all of a sudden there's like two words tacked on to the end, and so that changes the whole commandment that existed from the beginning. So I do think there's a lot of gaslighting, because I mean she ends up even questioning. She even says like she couldn't remember if that was there before, or maybe she was wrong, then she ends up internalizing that and doubting herself and saying, oh, maybe I had it wrong. And I do think that that's something that, when you start to hear enough lies enough times, I think it becomes hard to decipher what's true and what's not. And I think truth is another huge theme.
Oh, definitely.
The importance of truth, right? Like especially in this novel. And I was watching, actually, I wanted to bring this up. I was watching Andor, which is a Star Wars show, and I don't know if you've seen it, but the second
know,
season, yeah, it's so good. The second season actually has. I literally just watched this the other day, and there's a quote by Senator Mon Mothma that says, "The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil." And I think that is so emblematic of what this book is talking about, right? Like, George Orwell is talking about how important it is to have truth, right? And to have not to distort that, to kind of be able to agree on like what is true. And here we have an example of animals that are distorting that all the time, like Squealer, especially Napoleon as well, but Squealer is the mouthpiece, like we were talking about. And when there's no truth, there's no sense of reality. You kind of don't know, like it's easy for you to lose your sense of self too, right? Like your individuality. And how do you react around other people if everybody is reinforcing the fact that, oh, maybe we are all wrong and we're just going with whatever Napoleon says or Squealer says. Like, they do not, instead of getting together and saying, you know what, yeah, I think that commandment said something different, and this sounds weird, and I don't think that's right, and they're lying to us about the rations, and they're lying to us about this. Instead of getting together and forming that like community, they all start to kind of doubt themselves, and they just go along with it, right? Yeah. And there's a lot of symbolism with even the animals, not just their names, but excuse me, but the animal type and what they do. So, for example, the sheep.
Ooh, yep.
Right? The sheep, they just shout, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, right? And there's a lot of symbolism in that word, because sheep tends to be somebody who's like blindly loyal, yeah, and they just follow with whatever whatever goes along. And we hear that word even today, right? Like, that word gets thrown around a lot today. So
I mean, I just said black sheep.
Yeah, black sheep, or
like
just sheep.
Yeah, even like a herd of sheep.
Yeah, a herd of sheep, and it goes back into like what you said, groupthink, right? The sheep are literally sheep because they're just going along with whatever Napoleon or Squealer are saying, and they aren't really stopping to take a minute to think about it or talk about it, or like I said, like maybe think critically about it, like what is going on here, like what maybe he's not really out to help us. So
I have to watch Andor. That sounds amazing.
It's so good.
Not sponsored.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I love what you said. Like, truth is the foundation of most things, if not like all of reality, right?
Right.
So imagine that taken away from you. You don't know who you are, what to think, or where to go. Like, if you have questions,
Right.
You basically cannot trust anything.
And if we can't agree on what's true, then how can we exist? Like, if me and you cannot even agree on, like, okay, we're here in this room, we're talking about this book, and we can't agree on those basic things, like, how are we even going to begin to have a conversation about anything?
Or let alone another revolution.
Right, exactly. Something even more important than just us sitting in the room, right? Like, us, like, talking about, I don't know, politics, because this is very politically charged.
Yes.
And it's talking about, like we said, the Russian Revolution and all these other themes. But yeah, like, how do you even have a conversation with somebody or people if we can't even agree on what is true and what's a fact?
And what exists and what doesn't.
Right, exactly.
It's just making philosophical. I love it.
Yeah. It's so important, right? Like, I think it's important to establish those ideas, and to, there has to be some agreement. I mean, to me, truth is like the one thing that's foundational that we really, really need in order to be able to exist. We need to agree on some sort of reality, right? And even that's contested if you want to get even more philosophical, but like we have to agree on at least the bare minimum, right? Like for us to go anywhere, do anything.
That was so eloquently said. I don't want to add anything to that. Like that is the entire thing. Like mic drop. That is wow. That was really brilliant. Yeah, I think so too. Like truth is the foundation of reality. Period. Like there's nothing more to be said. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, and I well, thank you. And I also wanted to ask you, I guess going back to what we were talking about, exploitation,
Right.
right? What do you think the novel says about exploitation?
I think it says a lot actually. Let me look at my notes. Yeah. So, for example, I think that all of the animals represent something, right? Something about the communism manifesto of how there's the bourgeois and we have the middle working class, right? So we're going with exploitation. The working class is the ones that are being exploited, and for example, we can see this with Boxer, right? Boxer, he was, as a result of both Squalor's propaganda and Napoleon's influence on the farm, he was basically brainwashed to believe that whatever Napoleon said is right. Literally said Napoleon is always right. And also with I will work hard. So that goes back to what you said, like how exploitation plays a part in these things, because it's ironical how the animals start the book as being exploited by Mr. Jones, and then they end the book being exploited but by Napoleon and the rest of the pigs. So yeah, I think exploitation is a really big theme, and also as well with Molly. Molly is also like part of the exploited class, right? Um, but she is like more comfortable in being exploited because she gets not even a lot of privilege. She just gets like bows and like really simple luxuries like bows and the ability to eat oat, oat?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think
oats.
she did. Yeah, she definitely gets some privilege in like wearing the bows for sure. For whatever reason, is something that she enjoys and makes her happy. And one of the commandments in that the animals create is that they should not wear anything like human, right? Like any clothes or anything. So the bows are supposed to be banned or not allowed. But yeah, she does like that privilege, right? And I think that's a good point that you bring her up because although she is representative of maybe like a lower middle class, I think also she represents, again going back to psychology. There's a lot of this happens a lot of the time where people are being oppressed, right? And
Right.
depending on if somebody is able to have a little bit more privilege, then they're willing to take that versus banding together with the other people because we like to center ourselves towards privilege,
Right.
right? Like not us, but like in general, right? Like we,
I mean, it's human nature.
yeah,
And then,
exactly,
like being comfortable in where you are
right,
in life. That's
right.
human nature.
And I think that's, I
And
definitely think,
animal nature, I think.
yeah, for sure.
I mean,
For sure. And I think that's like definitely what she represents is that very realistic thing that happens with humans, how we enjoy our stuff, right? Like even I mean, we live here, here in the US there's a lot of like people like to overconsume, and that's just
for
that's that's just a thing that people enjoy. They like having stuff. And so if she's being told like, oh yeah, you can have this stuff if you go along with what we're saying, I mean, of course she's gonna take it. Like she doesn't she'll do whatever so that she can get what she wants, right? And that's kind of like what her character kind of symbolizes.
Yeah, I think so too. It's the like what you said. I love that. Like it's really brilliant how you brought that up. Like this whole entire thing of overconsumption because it's a really big thing, not in the U.S. only. I think the rest of the world, and how yeah. I mean, we're willing to be a little bit exploited because we get like the nicer things in life. So I think that was brilliant.
Thank you.
Oops.
Yeah, no, that's and I'm glad you brought her up because yeah, I do think there's a lot of symbolism. I think you also mentioned Boxer, right?
Oh,
And I think like
yes.
unfortunately again, this is very very reflective of reality and what we see today and in the past of how there are people I believe the working class, they call them the proletariat, and there are people that they're willing to work themselves to death, right? For someone who doesn't really care about them and who's just exploiting them. And in this case, it's Boxer, and he's doing all this work. Like I think at one point, the novel even says he worked enough to make up for the rest of all the animals combined. So he was doing a lot of work, and in the end, I mean, we see that spoiler alert, that ends up being his demise because he ends up getting so sick and hurt that they send him off to a slaughterhouse for horses,
I mean,
and
they tell the animals that he's going away to the hospital to get treated.
sure,
But then
yeah,
the animals find out, like as he's being brought to the slaughterhouse, that he's going to a slaughterhouse, and they
right.
try to save him, but
It's too
unfortunately,
late. It's too and I
yeah.
think that's such a huge message that George Orwell is trying to say is that it's important to be cognizant of all these things before it gets to that point where you pass the line and it's too late, and the animals, like you said, they don't realize that he's getting taken to a slaughterhouse until they read the name of the truck, and then they're like, oh wow, and they try to shout and tell him to get out, but it's too late, like it's already leaving.
I think he even tries to get out, but because he's so weak that he cannot escape.
Exactly, and they can't. There's nothing they can do. The gates open. The horses. They try even telling the horses that are taking the carriage, like, hey, wait, and the horses like ignore them and they take off. And it's just like, yeah, it's just unfortunate. And then even then, like the way that Squealer tries to flip that, right,
Oh
and say
yeah.
like, oh, that's not a slaughterhouse. They recently, they bought an old car that was a slaughterhouse, and now they're like trying to he's trying to say that they were taking him to the vet still, and
Yeah, he even said that. Like exactly, like going to the vet and he's being treated at the most nicest facilities. Like he's staying in a spa day, don't
yeah,
worry.
they're paying so much money for him to be there. Like
Yeah.
they try to make it like if it's like, oh, it's such a burden to them, and like they're doing so much, right? But in reality, that's not what happened.
And going back to psychology a little bit, I think that's really important. Like Napoleon's trying to guilt these animals, kind of like guilt trip them. Like, see, you're expensive to care for, so you must work harder in a way.
Yeah, and I think again that goes back to not just the gaslighting but also the abuse, right? Like
Oh yes.
Napoleon is very abusive to these animals mentally and in some ways physically. um and he really instills a lot of fear in them, and I think that also goes into how he's able to control them, right, is through fear. That's one of the reasons why he gets the dogs and he raises them, because they're pretty much his attack dogs, and they're ready at his command to just go and kill whoever says anything against Napoleon. Like they're so scared to they it gets to a point where they're so scared to even speak up and say like that's not true, because they know that they're gonna get attacked if they do.
Yeah, I think so too. Like the image of these dogs, because they start as little puppies, right? So you're not scared of them initially, but they grow up to be these massive beasts, and they even are described to have like little, what are they called? Like the little
Little things.
fangs, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like this really pretty, scary image of like if you speak up, there's going to be violence involved. Like it's to that point of going back to the abuse, right? It's this dread of impending violence, which is really scary to live with. I can only imagine.
Yeah, and I think, and again, we were talking about that these characters symbolize real people, and in Napoleon's case, right, he symbolizes Stalin, and I mean, this is the reputation that Stalin has of being just brutal and you know everybody was scared of him or scared to speak up against him,
Yeah.
and I think this does a great job at showing that, and again making it accessible to all types of readers, right? Like you don't even have to be a college student to read this. You can be a kid and still notice that there's something wrong, and that Napoleon is not a good guy. Like he's not a good friendly character, right? Like he's definitely up to no good, and I like that George Orwell does that so well. Like we can we can see the symbolism in it as college students and dissect it and analyze it that way. But also as a kid, I mean, you can tell like what's wrong here, right? Like the message is pretty
Yes.
clear, I think.
Yeah, it's just basic empathy. So,
Right.
like a kid will be able to read this. I mean, they will be confused, but they for sure could read this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, and speaking of that, actually, I did want to bring up, because I know we were talking about it earlier, that actually when George Orwell was trying to get this book published, not only did he have a lot of pushback, because it was during, the World War II, the aftermath of that,
Yeah.
actually before and after and during, but one of the things that I had found was that people tried to relegate the book to a children's section, and they had to fight to not have it put in a children's section because, well, yes, it's about animals, and there are animals, and it does read like maybe like a children's story.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's a lot of symbolism and political message and yeah, it's a fable, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of complexity, right, to the novel and the symbolism. Some of what we've talked about right now, but
Mhm.
there's even more that we could get into. I mean, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting too. Like what you told us, like how this was initially tried to be published as a children's fable. Like it's definitely not for children.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I guess it says something about how universal this book is, right? Like the initial publishers thought like, oh, kids can read this.
Yeah,
So therefore anyone can.
for sure, I agree.
um,
So, did you have anything? I know I wrote down some quotes, but did you have any quotes that you wanted to bring up or talk about, or maybe we could get a little deeper into?
yeah, I guess the one that struck with me was like almost at the end, I think. Well, I have it here, but hold on. Oh yeah, this one, but I also have it here. It is how the animals are looking at the pigs right from outside the window, and they're looking how the pigs literally resemble humans because they're surrounded by humans. They're drinking and dressed as humans, and are also like, I think it's after a business deal, right after they decide to do commerce with the other humans. And the quote is, "The creatures outside look from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again. But already it was impossible to say which was which." And like I know that's at the end, but that's why it's at the end, right? It's the
Yeah.
quote that hits the most. Because I guess it goes back to the theme of power, right? How power can corrupt people. Going back to the a little bit of the historical context, right? The Russian Revolution. You told me earlier that Stalin tried to overthrow the Tsar of Russia, basically, and that's how it happened. The Russian Revolution.
Yes, so the Russian Revolution, yeah, there was just an overthrow because the Tsar. So the Tsar Nicholas is, I think, the second is the one that the farmer is based off of, right,
Uh-huh.
Jones. So yeah, they end up overthrowing this guy, but then Stalin comes into power, and I think Vladimir Lenin as well before that. But um, yeah, like there's just it's like the thing that they were fighting against, and I really like the way that you worded it. That how power can corrupt people, because I think that's true, and we do see that a lot. And yeah, it's interesting how they become the very thing that they were fighting, and they get corrupted, and it's like you can't even tell the difference between them and the humans anymore. I mean, that's like scary. Like,
It is really scary.
yeah, I think so.
Because we don't know which one to fear more, like the pigs or the humans. Like who is our oppressor now, right?
Yeah, that's a good
And
point.
yeah, and going back to a little bit with the Russian Revolution, I think it was started like as a good thing, right? Like we have to overthrow monarchy, monarchy that is oppressive. So it began as a good thing, but later on, same as Napoleon, like things got distorted and taken out of proportion and out of control, and hence we had this entire oppressive regime again. But it's different somehow, but still oppressive nonetheless. So yeah, that's why it's one of my favorite quotes. I think it's really like brilliantly executed by Orwell. Right, it's scary but also very real, and that's why it's really, I don't know, really, really powerful. I want to say.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that
Yeah,
quote.
thank you. Do you have one that you want to share, maybe?
I do actually. Well, I have a few, but
You're like,
I don't know how much time we have. So let's see. Let me think which one is worth sharing the most. Okay, so I do like this one a lot. And it's on page 55, and it says bravery is not enough, said Squealer. Loyalty and obedience are more important. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is when they're talking about Snowball, and they're trying to pretty much tarnish his reputation, and they're saying that, you know, I think they were saying that Snowball was brave, and Squealer's here saying like that's not enough. Like we need loyalty and we need obedience, and I think that's really emblematic of like a dictatorship and like a tyrant too, and how they just they don't care about bravery, they don't really care about education, they don't care about thought, they don't care about any of that. They're really just they really just want loyalty and obedience, and that's what matters to them because that's how they stay in power. If people are loyal and if they're obedient and if they don't question things, even better, right? Like I think that goes back to what we were saying about the sheep and also Clover and like people that just don't push back at all. So that's one of the reasons that I really like it. Really quick, since I did use the word tyrant, I do want to define that really quick. So tyranny is government by a ruler or a small group of people who have unlimited power over the people in their country or state and use it unfairly or cruelly. And so we definitely see that with Napoleon. He's definitely a tyrant. But yeah, that's one of the reasons that I really like it. I think Orwell is really saying like these things are dangerous. Like to be just loyal and obedient, that's not necessarily the way to go. There has to be again some accountability, and people should feel free to, or they shouldn't be scared to speak up and challenge somebody who's ruling them, or who's in a leadership position. I think that definitely resonates today for me at least, and I think that when you instill fear in people, that's just like that's just like a gateway to this to dictatorships and tyrants, and that's kind of like to me what Orwell is trying to warn us about.
I think he even said that in. I haven't read 1984, but you were telling me earlier how this team entirely. It does play a big part in Animal Farm, but in 1984 is this entire massive team. So I think that's really brilliant. Yeah, exactly how like we're expected obedience and complete lack of individuality. So
Right. And I think we had both brought up individuality as well, right? Like we
yeah.
were talking about it and how important it is, I think, to combat this situation. And we see a lot of the animals being stripped of their individuality. So do you have anything to add to that before we wrap up?
Mm, yeah, I mean, I guess if we're talking about individuality, I think it's something really important to develop, especially what you said with like in the face of a regime that is like oppressive, kind of like with Russia, right? If it's oppressive, if you are an individual and you're secure with your individuality, you have enough strength to fight back, and you have enough strength to inspire others to fight back. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say. That I think, like, even though it's like a historical allegory, I think it's really brilliant nonetheless. And the fact that it's not like even time, like we don't have a specific time, so it means that it can happen at any time in any point in history. So yeah, that's all I wanted to ask. Like, I think it's a this brilliant work of Orwell, right? Like he was really clever. So I think it should be read, and like I said earlier, it shouldn't be really feared. Like there's nothing to fear. Like sure, it's like really charged with history and context, and we were saying earlier how an hour isn't enough time to like fully dissect and discuss this book. So that's why we kind of owe it to Orwell, right, to read this book. It's, I mean, it's a classic.
Right. No, and I totally agree with what you said. I
Mhm.
think it is very timeless for
Mhm.
sure. And I like that he chose to tell this in a farm because I mean that could be anytime, anywhere, any place,
Mhm.
right? Like there's farms everywhere
Yeah,
across
in
the
the
world.
world.
So it's really interesting that he did that. And like 1984 that you brought up,
Mhm.
that one is also very, although it's from what I remember, it's a little bit more futuristic. Um, it still it can apply to any time period, and I think that's really speaks highly of him as a writer, that he can
Definitely.
do that, right? Like he can, it doesn't matter what time period we're in, it's relevant, it can be relevant, and it usually is relevant. And I just wanted to end with the quote, if I may, on page 152. It's there was a quote that I saw from Russell Baker, and it says, and in Animal Farm, sorry, I'll give you a second to look it up.
No,
I'll do it
you're
too.
good.
So it's on
Here's two.
152.
Yep. Mhm. Oh, it's in the afterword.
Yes, it's on the bottom. It says, in Animal Farm, Orwell left us a lesson about the human contribution to political terror that will always be as up to date as next year's election," by Russell Baker. And I think that's like, I really like, aside from us just talking about the book, I really like the way that it's been received and how people in the afterword and in the forward, um, what they have to say about it, right? And how meaningful it is and how important it's been. And I, like you said, an hour is definitely not enough for us to get into
Definitely.
it. I think we could go on and on and on if we had the time, and if we had the
Next
somebody
episode.
that,
No,
yeah,
I'm just
yeah, yeah,
kidding.
part two. But
Part two
like,
of 50.
yeah, but like it's just so it's just packed with symbolism and
Mhm.
information, and it's education, and it's just there's so many great themes in this book that I think we, like I said, we can just go on and on about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like the fact that it was tried to be published as a children's book, right? It transcends age, it transcends nations and languages because book has been translated by I don't even know the entire number of languages that it has been translated into. So the fact that it's a book that is well read and it's a classic and the entire world knows about it tells you everything you need to know about it, right?
Right. Yes, definitely. And yeah, and it's just like you said, it's a classic, and I think for a good reason. And it's just really interesting. We didn't have a lot of time to get into George Orwell, also known as Eric Arthur Blair. You know, we didn't have a lot of time to get into his background, but I think this is definitely a book that people should read with context. Maybe even if it's not the first time, like I know you said, you know, maybe you can just read it blind the first time,
Mhm.
and then the second time, I think it's important to really contextualize it and look into George Orwell, Eric Arthur Blair's history and what he went through, and it gives a lot more meaning to what he's writing about, right? Because it's when you read about him, which we have,
Extensively.
yeah, it's really interesting to read this again
Mhm.
through that lens, right? Like it's like almost like reading a different book because you're getting so much more meaning into it and information. So
Mhm.
it's interesting. But did you want to add anything else before we wrap up?
Yeah, kind of like just a little bit to your idea. I think like if I were to recommend someone to read this book, right, it would be like don't read it without context. Well, read it without context first. That way you can form your own opinion on the book, right? And you can also like not even project, but kind of visualize how this plays in in your real life. And then you read it the second time with the background of the entire Russian Revolution. It's and its historical context both on Orwell, right, and of the Russian Revolution, and then you can have this more, I want to say, more informed, more solidified opinion of the book. And yeah, like what you said, I think that was really clever. Yeah, it's like reading an entire different book, right? The second time around, you find things that you didn't quite notice, and then you're like, oh, right,
Right, right. Or the
yeah.
characters, you're just like, oh, okay, I think I like understand even more now what he's talking about here, or in this part, you know. So it's really it's a great book, and I'm really happy that we got to talk about it.
Me too.
Honestly, like, yeah, I'm so happy we got to do this, and you know, thank you for sharing all your points, your quotes, your what you took from it, which is really interesting. I think it's interesting the way that our thoughts kind of aligned, and also the way that we kind of looked at things a little bit differently, which I think it just adds to the complexity of this book, right? That we can read it in different ways and add a little bit more to the conversation. So I'm glad that we had this conversation.
I'm glad too. It was really interesting to say the least, and I'm glad that we get to add a little bit more to the Orwell conversation,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
that's always pretty exciting. So yeah, it was. Thank you also as well for sharing your thoughts. They were really brilliant and clever, and I have so many good things to say about those.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So do you want to close this out or?
Um, yeah, I can do that. So that's why we were talking earlier about how this book is relevant, right? Because it's timeless, it's a classic, and everyone should read it, right? And if you're not going to read it because it's a classic, you should read it because of Orwell, right? His entire life history, like his real name is Eric Arthur Blair, right? And he was actually born in India, and then he was imprisoned in India in Burma. Then he fled to Spain to fight the civil war. Like this guy is insane. So if you're not going to read it for the historical context, read it because of Orwell, right? He's a
Yeah.
really interesting character, to say the least. So yes, I hope you do read it at the end because it's amazing. So yeah, I want to close us up with that. So thank you so much for watching, and we're so happy that you're here. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and yeah, we're so happy that you're here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.